Hello everyone and welcome to my OmniFactory world. As you can see, I just finished crafting up all the things I need to make the creative vending upgrade, the last craft of the whole pack, and I thought I would show off a bit of my base, show off all the crazy stuff that I've had to build to get to this point. So let's grab this infinity armor out and get started. One quick thing to note before we get started is that pretty much everything that I created in order to get my first tier 10 mission and create my first creative portable tank was all destroyed once I got the creative portable tank. So, you know, every single multi-block, every single automation setup that I created was torn down and replaced. So if you're in the early stages of the game and you want to see, you know, some of the stuff that you're going to need in order to get up to your first tier 10 mission, then I've got an Imgur link in the description, which is a base tour that I did on Imgur through an Imgur album of my base after I got the creative portable tank. So none of the setups that you'll see that you'll be making in early game or late game or even end game will be in this tour at all. So if you want to see the old stuff, there's a link to an Imgur album there. There's also a link to my current base tour, which I did an Imgur album of, which I have some interesting stuff in there. I recorded a GIF where I scrolled through my whole interface terminal and my ME terminals. I'm not going to do that here, but if you're interested in that, you can check that out as well. So I thought I would start off the tour by just giving you a nice overview shot of the entire base for some perspective so you can see the scale that we're working with. We can start off inside. This first starting platform was the very first thing that I made in the whole base. These, as you can see, the whole outside wall is made out of drawers. I use this to store, you know, the drives are kind of expensive early on, so I used these drawers to store all my items until I could auto-craft the 64K guys. The outside of all of these walls used to be all chests, but I replaced it with like applied energetic stuff as time went on. So I put drives here instead of chests, and I have all my auto-crafting from it, all my vanilla crafting recipe auto-crafting in here. I've also got all my packager and unpackager recipes in here. There's a couple of cool things in here, so we'll go through it quickly. You can see that I'm using packaged auto to round robin stuff to multiple alloy smelters. So, you know, instead of just encoding a recipe in applied energistics that says, you know, chassis plus soul powder makes this, I encode this into a package, and then whenever I request this, it'll send a bunch of packages to the alloy smelters that will round robin things to in the correct proportions to every single machine. I use that trick in a lot of different places, but this is the very first one where it got set up. So you can also see some of the recipes aren't just one-to-one. So I'm not making, you know, just two graphite and one diamond makes 2 carbon alloy. I'm doing 64 at a time. That's just so that if I do a huge craft, this package doesn't become the bottleneck because it's a little bit slow. This is where I have most of my ultimate crafting recipes in here. You can see I automated the ultimate generators and the ultimate power storage. This recipe was a huge pain in the butt because all of these generators from Extra Utilities 2, I think you can see if I hold control, they're all the same item. They have the same item ID and the same NBT tag, or the same NBT data, but their tag is different. So you see the type down there? Yeah, so the only difference between these generators is that NBT tag, and Applied Logistics doesn't use those, so I had to craft manually 200 of these generators each, and plus 100 extra for the top and bottom halves too. In this interface we have, this is what I used, this is how I crafted all the creative items. I didn't encode the recipes because my AE system would crash whenever I did it. The recipes were a bit too large. So all of the miscellaneous items you need for something like the creative RF source. If we look at the recipe real quick. So you can see all the items that you need aside from the ultimate generators and the infinity catalysts I've put in this recipe so that I can just request everything on the fly. So I don't have to like manually request 16 of these and 32 of these and 48 of these and 64 of those, you know. So that's how I crafted these items. Here you can see all my fusion crafting stuff. We'll get to this later on. Not a lot interesting in here. These are all the minor missions that I encoded. Nothing too fancy. And here's, I'm using packaged auto to round robin. It's the same trick that I use for the alloy smelters basically, but for soul binders and slice and splices as well. As you can see in this room, I've also got all of my, well, not all of them, but most of my important extended crafting recipes encoded in here. So you can see what recipe it's crafting in the automation interface itself. And if you've got a keen eye, you can also see this this little animation back here is the animation for the conveyor modules. So if we just not all of these are in use, by the way. I didn't end up using all of them. But here's the infinity ingots and the catalysts. If we go back here, if you've played through this pack to the point where you automate extended crafting, you'll know that the auto insert on these guys is really slow. So instead of exporting into a chest and pulling out of it using the interface, I'm exporting into a chest and then using LUV conveyors to push into the interface. It's a little bit faster. It's still not as fast as I would like. Maybe it's twice as fast, but it's still pretty slow. We can go around to the other side actually, because I don't think you can see everything from this angle. Yeah, so you can see I've bought behind this first set of recipes. I have a bunch more. Just all the packaged auto, or all the extended crafting recipes I automated. You can see tier 8, tier 9, tier 10, eternal catalyst back there as well. So that's pretty much all there is to this room. There's a couple of miscellaneous things. You can see this is the unpackager I use to unpackage those manual creative item recipes. Got some enchanting stuff here. A couple of annoying recipes that I still had to automate. My one lone resonator. One thing that I'm kind of upset I had to set up was this export bus, because my client would crash whenever I tried to request infinity ingot recipes. So I couldn't just request 20 infinity ingots or whatever overnight. So I had to set up this export bus that would schedule the recipes for me, because my client would crash. So yeah, let's head out of here and start touring the rest of the base. So the first thing I'll show off is my extremely complicated endgame power generation setup. As you can see, well, you can't actually see, but if I go under here, you can see that I've got a creative RF source from Draconic Evolution. This was the very first thing this was my very first goal after I got the creative portable tank, was to make one of these guys. And then I've got 5 energy pylons, which are hooked up to it and pumping power into this guy. You can see I didn't even get 1%. I kind of set this up pretty late. I was just using a tier 7 energy core before that. But yeah, you can see there's 10 billion RF per tick being put into the sky, which is more than I could ever possibly use. And then here's where the power is getting pulled out. If you'll notice, there's no cables coming out of these guys. So the way that I'm transferring power around my base is to use phantom faces. So because the superconductor conduits have a limit of 134 million RF a tick, these phantom faces are unlimited. So I hook up a phantom face to this block, and then if I connect a conduit to the phantom face, it's basically the same as connecting a conduit to this thing directly. So I get 137 or 134 million RF a tick out of each side of the phantom face when I link it up. So that's how I'm transferring power around my base. So next thing we'll check out is my endgame resource production, which is also insanely complicated. As you can see, I just have one creative tank for every single item that I could possibly need. So I create a creative tank, I pump into a fluid solidifier and make some blocks, and then shove that in a compacting drawer. And this gets me pretty much every single base ingot that I could ever possibly need. It's a little cramped back here, but we can show off some of them here. So you can see I've got neutronium, awakened draconium, nether stars, tungsten carbide. Like every ingot that you could ever need has a fluid solidifier recipe. There's also a couple of miscellaneous things in here. As you can see, crystal matrix ingot, that's a custom recipe, I believe. So here's all of the different stabilized fluids. There's some plates back here as well. You can create those directly in the fluid solidifier. One thing you probably noticed is this recipe here. I added in myself this omnium to motive omnium fluid recipe. This isn't in the version 1.2.1 of OmniFactory, but it was going to be in version 1.3, along with the void crystal liquid recipe. So I added this recipe in myself because it was going to be in the pack in the future, but the update just got delayed for, I think it's been over a month now, due to the pack creator's health issues and also progress on the hard mode version of this pack. So I added this recipe in myself so that I could actually progress through the end game, because, manually creating 500,000 of these using this recipe would just be impossible. Well, not impossible, but more work than I would have liked to have done. So yeah, there's how I'm getting most of my resources in endgame. So directly to the left of that setup, we've got another similar looking setup, but this one has a couple of extra steps. So over here is where I'm creating all of the plates and rods and gears and foils and wires and cables, you know, so all the most commonly used things. I compiled this list by requesting a bunch of tier 10 microminers and making a list of everything that was over, like, 5,000 items. A pretty big bottleneck of my system was these compressors here and these wire mills making hundreds of thousands of items. So I figured out everything that was being created and just made a fluid solidifier for them to make it a bit simpler. There's still a lot of recipes over there, but this cuts down a lot of the time. Here's the cable setup over here. A lot of these cables are used for, well, most of them are used just for motors and machine parts and stuff. You can see I've got some wires being created. I have a lot of these mechanical crafters around to convert the ingots between the GregTech version and either the Ender IO or the thermal expansion version, because for some reason there's no recipe using it's not an OR dictionary recipe. It's using this one specifically, which is kind of annoying. So one of the main reasons that I tore down pretty much my entire base after getting the Creative Portable Tank was in order to reduce my dependency on Applied Energistics 2. In my old base, I was having a lot of issues with such a massive AE system. I had hundreds of export buses, hundreds of crafting cards and interfaces and import buses and level emitters everywhere, and it was pretty much non-functional. Export buses would just stop exporting items, crafting recipes would get stuck indefinitely, and they have to be manually canceled. It was really, really frustrating. So one of the things I tried to do in the redesign of my base was to limit how much Applied Energistics I was using. And this setup was one of the first things that I created that took advantage of that. So here's the end product of pretty much the whole platform, which is a full drawer of every tier 1 to 6 circuit. So my goal was to create infinite amounts of these items, and I didn't want to have to encode a bunch of recipes in Applied Energistics. So I just set up a ton of machines and manually crafted everything. Well, not manual, obviously this is all automated, but I set up all the recipes automation just using conduits and mechanical crafters wherever that was necessary, and I fully automated all the creation of these circuits. So over here I've got circuit boards being created. If we can get out of here, you can see I've got all the different plastics just being produced from creative fluids, infinite sulfuric acid. I've got some fluid solidifiers that are making foil for me, and all the chemical reactors making the different circuit boards. Over here we've got, so there are actually a couple inputs to this system because I couldn't make it completely separate from AE2. So this is the one crafting card that I have in my entire base. It's supplying me with these crystal chips and these Naquadabules. So these are used over here to create all of the different, chips that I need for crafting circuits. We've got automated production of indium gallium phosphide over here. All the wires are created in here, similar to what you saw in the corner over there. And then the circuits are created in these assembling machines. So I've got a lot of setups like this over the whole base, and this was pretty much my design philosophy for my whole base. Identify something that you need, and instead of making the recipe in AE2 and setting up some machines to do it, just slap down a bunch of machines in creative tanks and dump the final output into a drawer, and then expose that drawer to your AE system using a storage bus on extract only. And that helped a huge deal with all the lag that I was facing. I didn't really experience too many problems in endgame because of systems like this. So I'm just going to run through a couple more of the systems that I created that are similar to this one up here. So as you can see, this is another system that takes pretty much no inputs from Applied Energistics. I think there's one input. I have no idea where it is, but somewhere, I think it's right here. Yeah. So you can see these are the two inputs to this system, but I'm not using a crafting card, so inputs like this are fine. As long as you don't use a crafting card, it doesn't seem to cause any problems. So inputs here are diamonds and nether quartz, and this system is producing, the main two products that I wanted was this fluxed electrum blend and this mana dust here. So all this here is creating the different dust that you need to make the different thermal powders out of this elemental reduction fluid. So I'm creating snow. I'm using a distillation tower to make small piles of charcoal for the charcoal dust, netherrack dust, endstone dust, all the things you need to make these. And then this chunk here makes all the dust that you combine with those to make the erothium, pyrotheum, cryothium, etc. Those are all produced infinitely. And then there's a bunch of miscellaneous dusts created here, so you need a lot of different dusts to make the lumium and the signalum dusts, so those are produced here. And then all these autocrafters produce the flux electrum and the mana infused dust and everything. Over here we have some heavy plating automation. So I set this up really early on, and it was actually enough just to have one UV compressor for every single heavy plating type, and that was, I removed all the recipes to create them, and I never ran out of anything except for the draconium heavy plating, which you'll see a lot more of these compressors kind of scattered around the base. Over here I'm creating all of the different types of nether stars that you need for the eternal catalyst. So you see, for each eternal catalyst, which you need a bunch of for every infinity catalyst, I'm creating all the different nether star types here. Unfortunately, there's no chemical bath above EV tier, so I had to set up a couple of those to make these improved nether stars. And then behind that, we've got all the gears that you need for the eternal catalysts. And you can see here that I added this recipe in. I think it was an oversight by the pack dev to not include this liquid, because all of these recipes for like the empowered Emretic and Vestonia gears, those liquids already existed by default. But this liquid was also going to be added in the next update, but that also got delayed. Back over on the other side of the base, we've got another fluids to output system over here, and this one is producing the reinforced mining lasers that you need for all of the high tier miners. So if I look at the tier 7 miner here, it needs 4 of these supercharged lasers, which create reinforced mining lasers. And because these are made in the advanced crafting table, it's pretty slow to make them when you need them on demand. So I have this system to just produce unlimited amounts of them. Yeah, not much to say here. One cool trick that I'm using here is a packager. This is essentially acting as an impulse hopper. So so that I can pump items into this automation interface without worrying about the glass being produced too fast, and glass being put in here when there's no room for it in the table anymore, and the system jamming up. So I just create a package to take all the inputs and stick them in a package, pass it straight into an unpackager, and then dump it into the interface. Some more constantly running crafting over here. You can see I've got some more compressors for this draconium plating. I've also got 8 ZPM assemblers here, which are constantly producing these glowstone units, which are needed for... Whoopsie. These are needed for the... no, of course, I can't type down there. These are also needed for the high tier miners. You need these warp engines for tier 7, 8, 9, and 10 miners. And they use 2 of these each. So, they take 100 seconds at IV. So it's good to have these crafting constantly. And then back here, I've got automated production of all the inputs that I need for the heavy plating for the tier 9 and 10 microminers. So you see the neutronium heavy plating needs these neutronium plates, which are produced here. And I think it's called fluxed heavy plating. This needs awakened draconium plates, fluxed armor plating, and quantum flux. So this and this are being produced here as well. Just a couple more of these fluid setups to go through. This system is constantly producing a bunch of different frames that I need for high tier machine components. So for LUV emitters and ZPM emitters, I need these frames. I need them for field generators as well. So they're being constantly produced here, so I don't have to encode them in applied energistics. More heavy draconium plating, some TNT just being produced from tooling. And then I've also got emitters here being auto-crafted. I use these for the LUV and ZPM emitters, so I didn't want to be crafting those constantly. You can see all the inputs for those are being supplied by an interface. And then over here, I've got automated production of the conduits. So I believe it's for the different thruster types. So for resonant thrusters, no, maybe it's the Ender.io ones. Yeah, so for vibrant thrusters, you need these vibrant energy conduits. And these were Surprise, surprise, this was another bottleneck, so I automated the production of that. And then you also need the draconium ones for the dark solarium thruster, which is also needed for these warp engines. So over on this platform, I have the system that's providing most of the nether quartz to my base. As you can see, I've got, I think this is 14 IV tier macerators constantly producing an unlimited amount of sand, which is dumped into this multi-smelter, which is constantly producing glass. So because there's no GregTech item pipes in this pack, I actually used tungsten steel chests as pipes, essentially, and just had LUV conveyors. These move items way faster than anything else in the pack can. Conveyor. So they move 16 stacks every second, which is a lot faster than the next best thing, which I believe is Ender IO conduits, which move, I think, 128 items every second. So I'm using these as pipes, basically, to move the glass to all of these LUV electrolyzers here, which are constantly producing nether quartz. So you can see I've got a million or so nether quartz here. There's some other random stuff on this platform that actually survived the Great Purge, where I tore down everything in my base. I never upgraded my my applied energistics processors past this simple little setup. Just never became a bottleneck, really. I've got a Fluix crystal system here, which I never upgraded. And here's my simple atomic reconstructor, which I also never upgraded. So we can move on to some on-demand crafting now, as opposed to all of the constantly running stuff you've seen so far. So here's the platform where I have all my basic GregTech machines automated. So you can see I've got compressors and wire mills, macerators, and lathes here. So this is just producing all the miscellaneous rods and plates and stuff that I need that isn't automated by this setup down here. So there's nothing too fancy going on here. I've also got all my assembling machines here. I've got one for every different circuit type and fluid type. So I think there's about 9. Yeah, something like 9 assembling machines here. I've got some extruders for miscellaneous things. And here's the alloy smelter system that I talked about earlier. So you can see all of these recipes here are just creating items from recipe packages, and then those get sent to these unpackagers, which push into the alloy smelters. And behind that, we have this random platform, which doesn't really have a lot of stuff on it. I've got some extruders that I just never upgraded that are creating items that I almost never need. I've got this canning machine here. I think this actually is the best. Well, you can actually make an EV one. I probably should have done that. But you cannot make super good canning machines. So this is the best thing I could make to get these batteries. It's pretty slow. This is one of the last remaining level emitter on an import bus setups that I've created, and this is for phytogrow, which I use for a couple of plants that we'll get to. I never set up this to run constantly either, which I probably should have. This is for creating vibrant and pulsating crystals. And then this is for some random lava-infused stuff, which is used for the Infinity Armor. And over here is where I'm crafting all my Ender IO stuff. So you can see here's the round-robin packaged auto setup that I have that I showed you in the recipe encoder over there. So I've got 20 soul binders and 20 slice and splices. I can actually spin these up because I think it's pretty cool when they're running, all 20 of them. Let's create these sentient enders. We'll just get 100 of those. That might not be enough, actually. Let's request 1,000. So during big crafts, I would need, tens of thousands of these, like Franken-zombies and sentient enders and stuff to make everything I needed. So these are definitely not overkill. Oh, here we go. That is a really disgusting sound. Holy. Okay. Yeah, so you can see the packages get dumped into here, and then they're round robin sent to all these unpackagers, which can push into both machines here. So you can see them all slowly spinning up, which will then activate the soul binders in a similar way. There they go. And they're provided with unlimited XP here. I've also got some powered spawners over here. This is really loud. Let me turn this down. Yeah. Okay. So I've got some powered spawners over here. And these are constantly producing all the different soul vials that I need. So 2 of them, the Witch and the Shulker, these are used a lot. The shulker vials make prescient crystals, which are used in the vibrant thrusters, which you need 3 of for every single warp engine. So you need a ton of those, and you need a ton of the witch ones as well to make the sentient enders, which are needed for high-tier circuits. So these were too slow to keep up, but fortunately there are other recipes for them. That's a lot. If we look up the shulker one, you can see there's a couple of... Yeah, so all the soul vials have a recipe like this. So thankfully I had enough shulker shells and enderman heads lying around to just create the soul vials manually. But if you wanted to do the powered spawner method, you would need probably like 30 of these, not just 5. And we've got some thermal expansion machines over here as well. So there's a lot of plates that you just can't make in the... Like, I think HSSG is a good example. HSSG. So these plates cannot be made in a GregTech compressor for whatever reason. So I think the simplest thing, you could use an extruder, but I opted to use the compactors for those types of plates. And then I've also got the gear augments in these ones. So these 8, or is it 9? These 9 produce gears, these 9 produce plates. And then I've got some other random machines up here. I've got energetic infusers for making fluxed phytogrow, as you can see here. And I've got the phytogrowth insulators for making these 4 materials here. So one of the only level limiter setups in my base, aside from this one over here. So this is making wood. This is making chorus flowers, which you actually need an insane amount of for these dislocators, which are used for the warp engines, and these advanced dislocators, which are also used for warp engines. So you need hundreds of thousands of those. So one of these is pretty much mandatory. I've got an ender pearl one as well, which doesn't get used very often now that I have an enderman farm, and one for sugarcane too, for paper. On this platform is all my wetware circuit board creation. So this is probably one of the worst recipes in the whole... Well, not, you know, it's not bad in terms of complication, but just in terms of how frickin' slow it is. You need hundreds of thousands of these wetware boards, and the recipe is, I think, 300 seconds at IV tier. Yeah, 300 seconds at IV. So when you need close to 1 million of these, you set up 40 ultimate voltage chemical reactors, which constantly produce wetware circuit boards. So thankfully I never ran out of dragon eggs. As you can see, I still have 1.3 million, so that never became an issue. But yeah, I've got 40 chemical reactors, which are constantly producing stem cells and wetware circuit boards. And I've got a couple assembling machines here as well, which are reusing some of the excess chips and wires from this platform here. They're not running anymore because I'm full on circuits, but they were constantly running as well. So we can take a look at my wetware stocks here. 900,000 wetware circuits, 350,000 wetware boards. So it seems like this setup was a little bit overkill, but I'm still glad that I made it. Okay, I think it's time we show off my whole deep mob learning setup for endgame. So this is how I'm creating pulsating polymer clay. As you can see in this chemical reactor, I am using the resonant clathrate method of getting the pulsating dust. There's a couple of ways you can get this. You can smelt uraninite or resonant clathrates, or you can just electrolyze ender pearls directly. But if we look through the recipes for ender pearls, you'll see that there is no fluid solidifier recipe. So you cannot get ender pearls from liquid. So instead I just used a creative tank of resonant ender so that I wouldn't have to input any ender pearls into the system, because it uses a lot of resonant ender. So I've got a bunch of macerators here which are producing glass, which is similar to this multi-smelter over here, which is constantly producing nether quartz. The nether quartz gets made into fused quartz, which is used in a couple of places, and also into the resonant clathrates here. You can see it's very fast. That gets thrown into the multi-smelter, which makes pulsating dust, which then makes polymer clay. So this drawer is full, but I would estimate that when it's not full, this system produces around 100,000 pulsating polymer clay per hour, so it's pretty quick. I've also got a couple of miscellaneous machines over here, making superconductor wire constantly, and here's a simple little cobbleworks. But this is where all the pulsating polymer clay gets used. So we'll just quickly run through these layers one at a time. At the back here, I have a naively small setup for creating all the materials that I need for the ultimate material, which is pretty much exclusively mob drops. So you can see it's made from wither bones, ender dragon scales, guardian scales, and dragon hearts. So because whenever you make dragon hearts, you also get a bunch of scales. As you can see in this recipe, for every 32 hearts, you get 3 stacks of ender dragon scales. So I decided to make 8 witherbone sims, 6 ender dragon scale sims, and 1 guardian scale sim, because this gives you 4 every time. So this was good enough for a while, but once I needed to craft the 200 infinity ingots for the infinity solar panels, it stopped being good enough. I've also got some more sim chambers over here for a bunch of stuff that I didn't need too often. This used to be enderman heads, but I needed more enderman heads later on, so I swapped the ender pearl barrel here. Not much more to say. Over here, I've got 16 shulker sims and 16 enderman sims. I would kind of swap around what all these loot fabricators were making, depending on what I needed. So I made a couple 100,000 emeralds out of this, a couple 100,000 diamonds, a couple 100,000 shulker cells, and a bunch of enderman heads as well. And then back here, we've got 96 sim chambers. Originally, these were all used to make dragon lair data. As you can see, when you get a pristine dragon matter, you only get 1 dragon lair data, and you need a hell of a lot of this stuff. So you need 4 stacks plus, oh yeah, just 4 stacks. So 4 stacks to make one of these lairs, these lair datas, and then that gets you chaos shards. So for every chaos shard, you need a stack of dragon lair data, and you need a lot of chaos shards. So yeah, I think you need somewhere around in the ballpark of 1.3 million dragon lair data. So that's why I have so many sim chambers that were just doing dragons. A couple days ago, though, I did swap these out to withers. So there's 48 wither models here that are producing wither bones, because I ran out of the stuff I needed to make ultimate material. So I did swap those out. Also, next to the deep mob loading setup, we have a bunch of extended crafting tables here. And these are making the ultimate materials that I need to make, or these are making the ultimate armors, rather, which are needed for this infinity gear here. So you can see I need like 18 chest plates and like 11 leggings and a bunch of different items to make the infinity armor. So honestly, I don't know if it was worth it to automate all these different armors that you need. It took maybe 2 or 3 hours. I probably could have manually crafted everything in that time, but it was an interesting automation project. It's basically just a bunch of automated crafting tables, so not super interesting, but yeah, this is how I made all the ultimate gear for the infinity armor. Across from these crafting tables, we have a couple of miscellaneous machines over here. This was actually a wetware circuit board setup that I created before the creative tank that I just never got around to destroying because it wasn't required. There's some also miscellaneous crafting over here. So energium dust, a bunch of random machines. I never made a second autoclave for, crafting with a recipe and using an export bus for all the different dusts. So I have this switch to manually turn it off when recipes need to go through. Probably should have just made a second autoclave, but yeah, not much to say here. Just a bunch of random recipes encoded. And over here, we have my 9 microverse projectors. So I'm using a similar trick here as I did for the alloy smelters and the soul binders. If we look in this interface, you can see all of these recipes just take a single recipe package as their input, and then they get extracted out of there and sent to the 9 different unpackagers, which send on blocking mode into the input of these projectors. So I've got 9 of these, and it still felt really slow when it was running. It was my main bottleneck even up until endgame with 9 of these. I probably should have made 16, but I didn't want to. Once I had 9, I didn't really want to upgrade any further. And yes, I did definitely cheat with this platform size. I'm not proud of it, but the projectors are too tall to go under these platforms. So don't yell at me. And I believe this is the final platform that we haven't covered yet, and this is where I have a bunch of extra utilities automation. So I automated the creation of this magical metal, which is needed to create, I believe the only thing it's needed for is these ultimate speed upgrades. You need the evil infused iron for this and the enchanted stuff for this, and these are needed for the creative mills. But I did make a couple thousand of them to speed up these resonators, because in order to make the creative energy source from extra utilities, you need 32 rainbow generators, which take 6 perfect opinium cores each, and then a couple of extra perfected cores around the outside. So you need, I think it totaled to, if you go all the way through to the bottom of the recipe tree here, you see the first core needs 4 red coal. I think you needed somewhere around 300 to 400,000 red coal, which even with 20 fully upgraded resonators powered by the 4 creative mills that I had here before I took them down to put in the recipe table, it still took like a whole day to craft all that red coal. So these were definitely required. Over here you can see, you remember the generators that I mentioned earlier that AE2 refused to craft because of their special NBT tags? Well, I thought that the mod that created them, the crafting table from that mod, should be able to craft the generators, but even if you put all the items in the input here, it just refuses to craft it. So really frustrating, these damn generators. So what I ended up doing was just, you can see I've got like recipes in here, so I would just manually take all the items out of the input, go over to this crafting table, shift click them in, and then craft 64 generators and put them back in my ME system. Did that for a couple hours until I had all of the generators I needed to finish the pack. And I think the very last thing to show off on this platform is my very end game ore processing system. So it's pretty simple. If you're new to the pack, if you're just starting, you've probably set up something like this before. I've just got, from each stage of the ore processing system, from macerator to ore washer to macerator to centrifuge, I've got GregTech ore dictionary filters. Get a screwdriver out. We can see what's in them. So in this one I've got crushed star. So all the crushed ores that come out of here go into this chest, and then they get pumped out into the ore washers, or I have a manual override here so that these ores go straight to the second set of macerators instead. It gets pulled out of there into some more filters. All these trash cans that you see up here are for getting rid of tiny piles that I didn't need. So we can actually go through all the ores that I processed here. So these are the only ores I needed to process once I had the creative tank. Most of the gems don't have liquid recipes. So apatite, emerald, diamond, Certus quartz, which was used for Certus quartz, and also quartzite, which is its main byproduct, and phosphor, which just gives me more apatite. I didn't need to wash any of those actually, so this setup was a complete waste. But I don't need the tiny dust from them. It would take so long to package them into regular dust anyway. It just wasn't worth the effort. So I'm just throwing away all the stone dust and the tiny dust and everything that I don't need, just chucking it into trash cans. And some of the macerator recipes, which produce like 12 crushed per 1 ore, were too fast. So whenever this chest got too full, this comparator would turn on and shut off this macerator here. So yeah, that's endgame ore processing. So I think now we can move down to the lower level of the base. I've got pretty much an identical setup for my large microverse projectors, but just using small ones instead. So we can see all the recipes I'm using here. I probably sent out around 100,000, maybe 150,000 missions in these small microverse projectors. I think you need 100,000 tier 1 missions alone just to get all the dilithium crystals that you need for all the chaos shard missions. So these things got a lot of use. But yeah, basically just send the packages into this crate and then round robin the packages into the projectors down here. They all have unlimited rocket fuel supply from creative tanks. And then I have a storage bus also on a trash can here to get rid of all the ores that I didn't need, so that they wouldn't clog up my ME system, because I would have had millions and millions of ores. If we look in my ME system, you can see I've got 1.2 million moon turf, and you get 1 stack of moon turf for every mission, so that'll give you a scale of just how many tier 1s I had to send out. Yeah, so it was also used a lot for the exquisite emeralds, which are needed for circuits, Certus quartz, stellar creation data, which is needed for hearts of the universe. I only ever set up 1 medium microverse projector because the only recipe that I automated in here was the tier 4 mission for lapis and diamond ore. So yeah, I only sent out a couple hundred of those, so I only needed 1 projector. And over here is the remains of my massive blast furnace array, which used to extend all the way down to the other side of this platform. and now I only have 8 blast furnaces. So you can see I'm constantly creating the tier 9 and 10 heavy plating. I'm constantly producing fluxed electrum ingots. This is the ender chest that was over on the other platform before. I've got a recipe for modularum, mana infused ingot, engraved crystal chips, and the 2 buell types. And that's the only recipes that I need to run through the blast furnace. So this neutronium heavy plating, this was running for about a week, and I only got 40,000. So definitely a good idea to not have this running on demand. Next to those, we have the only crafting CPUs I needed for endgame. If you remember, the only crafting card I have in my entire base is over there by the crystal circuits. So I didn't really need that many crafting CPUs. I honestly probably could have got by with just 3. And you might think that these crafting CPUs are kind of overkill. I think this one on the right here is like 5.5 million bytes. But you know, when you get to the end game of this pack and you need to make requests like 40 infinity ingots, and your recipe tree is like hundreds of recipes deep and hundreds of recipes wide, you get recipes that are extremely large. Like this one uses 6.5 million bytes, which is even too large for this big CPU here. So yeah, these CPUs are not overkill. Oh look, I'm out of quantum circuits. Good thing I'm finished the pack. So yeah, all of these smaller ones are about 2 million bytes each, and this one is 5 million. So those are all the crafting CPUs that I needed. If we move on over to the other side over here, you can see some of my assembly lines. These actually can share sides, but you can't have them in a big long line because you still need to input fluid on the sides here. So all of these assembly lines are for on-demand crafting. So you can see I'm crafting all my wetware, all my machine parts in here. I did use a neat little trick for round robining between all these different assemblers. I didn't want to, do recursive packaged auto for these wetware assemblies. So instead, what I'm just doing is I'm putting the same recipe in multiple interfaces. So you can see there's a wetware assembly in here, there's a wetware assembly in here and in here. And because these are on blocking mode, when the unpackager's internal storage of 10 recipes gets filled up, it'll start using another unpackager. So whenever I would do a large craft of hundreds, or if I can fly here, hundreds of thousands of circuits, all 8 of these would be running in parallel constantly. So it did work out pretty well. These aren't the only assembly lines I have, but these are the ones for on-demand crafting. The ones that are constantly running are over here. So I did set up 10 assembly lines to run dedicated recipes. One of my biggest bottlenecks was making chaos shards. And if you look at the recipe for chaos shards, you need 1 tier 8 miner and 1 of these layer datas, which comes from a tier 7 miner. So for every chaos shard mission, you need 1 tier 7 and 1 tier 8. The tier 7s have LUV field generators, and the tier 8s have ZPM field generators. And these take forever to create in the assembly lines. You see each one needs emitters, which are also created in the assembly line, and the ZPM emitter needs the previous tier emitter, which is also made in an assembly line. So, these recipes would take forever to run in those 8 assembly lines that I had over there. So I created these dedicated lines, which are constantly running. So all of the inputs for these recipes are supplied via interfaces, but none of them have crafting cards. So these are basically just acting as like an item pipe. So it's not too costly on resources. So these 4 assembly lines are making I think they're called neuroprocessing units. Yeah, so they're making these, which are used for the LUV field generators, and also these navigators for the tier 9 and 10 miners. So these 4 are constantly producing these. The next 3 assembly lines, so this one, and this one, are all producing LUV emitters. So you can see, you remember the emitters that we're crafting over on this platform over here, all get put into these interfaces, and these assembly lines are constantly running LUV emitters. This assembly line is constantly running ZPM emitters. You can see it takes LUV as input, and this is constantly producing those, and then these 2 produce the ZPM and the LUV field generators. So here's where you see all the neuroprocessing units and the LUV emitters getting used. take a quick look at my supply here, you can see I've got 6,700 field generator LUV and 1,500 ZPMs. So for every Chaos Shard mission, you needed 2 LUV generators and 1 ZPM1. And then here's my excess supply of LUV and ZPM emitters. So before I show off all my fusion crafting setups, which is my favorite part of the base, we'll save that for last, I wanted to show off some of the stuff outside of my main base that might be interesting. So we'll head to the overworld, and I'll show you my my Grains of Infinity farm. So here is my, it's kind of cramped down here. Here's my Grains of Infinity farm for endgame. So this blazing pyrotheum will set nearby blocks on fire, but it won't actually set bedrock on fire. So I have this netherrack here, which is set on fire by the blazing pyrotheum, and then the fire spreads from the netherrack to the bedrock, and it's being constantly like extinguished and collected by these ranged collectors, which pump it into the ender chest. The next thing we'll show off is my Enderman farm. So, oh boy. So this is 4 chaotic tier stabilized mob spawners from Draconic Evolution. You need ender pearls for a lot of different recipes. To make these advanced dislocators, just 3 ender pearls each. That was one of the big costs. I think you also need ender eyes for another fusion recipe. Yeah, for these ender energy manipulators, which are used in the tier 7 miners, you also need 3 ender eyes. And then you need eyes of ender and ender pearls for the emitters that you need for the field generators. So you need millions of ender pearls. So I had to set up one of these giant farms. You might think this is a little overkill, but honestly, I think this is required. If we head down here, you can see my super high-tech Enderman slaughtering system. I did want to use a Killer Joe. I made a Draconic Sword here. Fully upgraded Draconic Sword with Looting 3 to kill the Enderman. It has like an area, like a radius of like 30 blocks or something ridiculous. But the Killer Joe didn't recognize the sword, so I just made this platform here. And there's only one thing left to show off. I think this is also in the overworld. It's not really that interesting, but I did set up a tree farm because I needed a lot of apples. I actually have, wow, that's a lot more than I need. But you need apples to make the magical apples, which are needed for the speed upgrades, which I needed a lot of for all my resonators. And last but certainly not least, I want to walk you through all of the fusion crafting that I set up in this world. So we'll start over here. One of the things I needed a lot of for the high tier miners was wyvern cores. So these machines here are constantly producing all the inputs that you need to make wyvern cores. If we just take a look at the recipe real quick. So you need these blocks of nether stars, which are made directly from fluid. You need draconic cores, which are made one step from fluid. So all these can be made from fluid. And then you need these compressed lava blocks, which are made from liquid, and nether quartz, which is made from glass, which is being created here. So these are all the inputs that you need to make wyvern cores. And then also a couple of inputs that you need for awakened cores. So these 4 fusion crafters here are what's consuming those inputs. So you can see I have 3 of them that are constantly making wyvern cores, and then I have 1 here that's constantly making awakened cores. This little comparator system here is just used to prevent the extraction of wyvern cores if I'm running low. So I think if I get below like 3,000 or something, then the awakened cores will stop being produced. So you can see I have around 7,000 awakened cores and 4,000 wyvern cores. So yeah, some of the other things that I was crafting, you can see in these drawers here. So the rest of the fusion crafters are all dedicated to making these. So all of these are used for the tier 7 and 8 miners. These ender energy manipulators and the energy core stabilizers are used directly in the recipe. So you can see the tier 7 miner takes 1 of these and 2 of these. These 2 crafters here are constantly producing the advanced dislocators. None of them are running because all of these drawers are full. But these 2 are constantly producing advanced dislocators. This one is making the ender energy manipulator, and this one is making the energy core stabilizer. You can see I've got an interface here with no crafting card, constantly stocking some of the materials that you need. And then this one as well, which allows the crafting of dislocators and the particle generators. And then these 4 over here are 4 more advanced dislocator crafters. So I've got 6 in total making these, which that tells you anything about how many of those you need. So the final setup to show off is my distributed chaotic fusion crafting setup. You can see I just requested some stuff so you can see it in action while I'm explaining everything. But this is probably the most power-hungry thing I've ever made in Minecraft. If we get our conduit probe out real quick, I don't think this recipe will use it, but for some recipes like the neutronium solar panels, this conduit would get maxed out. And this phantom face is hooked up directly to our energy core, remember, so this is providing unlimited power. So for every connection here, this conduit would max out at 134 million RF a tick for 3 injectors. And then if all 4 of these are running, that's 134 million times 12, which is around 1.6 billion RF per tick just to craft using these injectors. So pretty insane. But here's the entry point. So you can see again I'm using packaged auto. So all these recipes here are just one recipe package makes 1 item. The recipe packages get put into this chest, and then they get distributed into the unpackagers here, which dump the items into these crates. And then all of the 4 setups here are all identical, so we'll choose this one just as a starting point. You can see here's one set of items for a recipe. So I only have 1 filter in this whole system here, if I can get at it. So this is the only filter you need for an entire system. You just have 1 whitelist filter on this center pillar with sticky mode enabled, which means that, as you can see in the tooltip there, selected items will only be sent to this or other sticky outputs. So if a conflux catalyst is pulled out of the crate, it can only go here. So that means that these injectors don't need any filters on them. So I just send anything to these. And these are all in single item mode, so they can only take 1 item at a time. This redstone comparator, when a valid recipe is found inside this crafting core, it will output a signal, which will then stop the extraction of items out of here. That's pretty much it, except for this little unpackager here. So you can see this recipe package here, which contains 1 Wyvern energy core. There's a couple of items that are used in both the outside of a recipe, as you can see here, for these draconic relay crystals and the draconic solar panels. The Wyvern energy core is on the outside. But it's also used in the middle for crafting Wyvern solar panels and draconic energy cores. So if there was ever a recipe, you know, like let's say I wanted to automate this and I put a Wyvern energy core in the center here, well, that would prevent, in the draconic solar panel recipe, it would prevent the item from going into the pedestal here, and the recipe wouldn't work. So if there's ever an item that needs to go in the center that also goes on the outside in other recipes, I just put it into a recipe package, which then gets put into the unpackager here at a higher priority, which dumps it into here. That's pretty much the whole system. The items are then pulled out back into these interfaces to complete the recipe. And then I actually did have to set up a smaller crafter over here just to do 1 single recipe, the chaotic solar panel. For whatever reason, it kept jamming in this system. I think what was happening was because this recipe has so few inputs, and the unpackager takes like a couple seconds to actually, you know, delete the package recipe and get the real item and put it into the adjacent inventory. So I think what was happening is like the package would get sent into here, and all 4 items would get put onto the pedestal, and then the next, you know, because the crate then became empty, the next recipe would go in, and because the unpackager hadn't finished putting the item into here, the redstone signal wouldn't be on yet, and the next recipe would get shoved into the injectors and jam up the system. So I had to create a separate system just for that recipe, but other than that, this worked flawlessly for creating any combination of recipes in huge quantities. And I think that's pretty much all there is to show off. If you have any questions about any of my setups or any setups that I missed that you saw in the background that you wanted to know about, you can feel free to leave them in the comments of this YouTube video, or you can DM me on Reddit. I've got a link to my Reddit post that I made with an Imgur album there as well. Again, if you want to see any of my setups from before I made the creative tank, I've got an Imgur album in the description which shows off all those. That was a base tour that I did before I made the tank. So there's really only one thing left to do. And that is to craft the vending upgrade. It's been a long time, and I really enjoyed the pack. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and I hope you guys enjoy Omega Mode when it comes out. Thank you for watching.